Anyone who's seen my itineraries think it's insane, but honestly, I don't think they're anything hard or special. They are a skill anyone can do. And in this video, I'll be going over how I planned my 4-day trip to Canada, what I packed in my suitcase, and useful tips I've learned over the years. First thing I like to do is use my American Express Platinum Concierge Service benefit. Since I have the card, might as well use the benefit. Honestly, in my past experiences, the American Express Concierge benefit is kinda overrated. It's no better than a Google search. Maybe they had something that I didn't know about. So I asked the following. I was hoping you could help me recommend some things to do and eat in Toronto, Ontario, Burlington, Ontario, and Niagara Falls. Thanks. And the concierge service came back with this response. I can locate restaurant suggestions for you. For the things to do, I would recommend checking out Get Your Guide at getyourguide.com. So that's kind of disappointing. I really thought the American Express concierge service could, make up an itinerary for me or something that was pre-made beforehand, just like a book of stuff to do. But that's fine, I get it, they're busy. So I checked out the website they recommended me, Get Your Guide. And apparently American Express card members can get extra discounts, so that's pretty good. But can it recommend me something actually entertaining to do in Toronto? So I typed in Toronto, Canada, picked the dates that I was going to be visiting Toronto, and see what they would suggest for me. And honestly, it's pretty basic stuff. It's just like tourist attractions. And in my experience of tourist attractions, they're really not worth the price, in my opinion. But it's interesting. It gave me a lot of ideas for stuff that maybe I wanted to do. But how about the second piece of the request? Recommendations to restaurants. So I went through the whole shindig of trying to narrow down the best restaurants for me. The first place they recommended me was Raza, and it didn't look too bad. However, not necessarily something I was looking for. Kind of fine dining, like tuxedo suit kind of setup, but it's an option. The next place they recommended me was Earl's Kitchen and Bar. Now I definitely didn't want to do this option because I know there are Earls in the United States, so that option was out. And the last recommendation they recommended me was the Table Rock House restaurant. Now this I definitely didn't want to go to because based on the pictures of the food, it didn't look too appetizing. It looked like a restaurant more for tourists that didn't have any taste buds. It could be great, but I didn't want to take that chance, so that was out. So after I got some ideas from the American Express concierge, now it was my time to make an itinerary schedule. Okay, first thing you need to do is figure out where you're gonna stay. So personally for me, I knew I had a lot of built points, so I wanted to book something through Hyatt since I know I usually can get the most value from my points when booking a Hyatt hotel. So I typed in Toronto, Canada to guest, typed in the date, and then clicked on use points, and then find hotels. And in Canada, there actually isn't too many options of Hyatt hotels. And specifically, we wanted to stay in downtown, but they were quite expensive. The Park Hyatt was 25,000 points or $669 Canadian. The Hyatt Regency, which I usually can book for about 9,000 or 6,000 points, was 12,000 points in Toronto. And this last hotel, which was 12,000 points too, but looked fairly nicer compared to the Hyatt Regency, and was worth about the same amount. So out of the Hyatt Regency and Andor House, I wanted to go for quality instead of location, so I chose the Andor House. But what to do for the other nights because I didn't have that many Hyatt points to be spending. So I checked out Hilton because I had some American Express points which can be converted to Hilton points, so I didn't have to spend too much money on these hotels. And honestly, there weren't too many Hilton properties as well. There was a lot on the outside, but none that really caught my eye and was worth the price in my opinion. So I checked on Marriott, and there were a lot more Marriott properties in Toronto downtown, but still they weren't worth the price. Maybe I could get 1 cent per point. However, when looking overall at a road trip and I backed out to see where we would pass by anyways, I saw this pretty neat hotel in Burlington, Ontario, Canada, and it was pretty expensive at the time I was booking it. It was $650 US. However, points wise, it was only 27,000 points. So since it's on the way back to the United States from Toronto, plus with the stop in Niagara Falls, I thought it was more worth booking this hotel, maybe finding a new area we might like. Since we had the car, we could go anywhere. So I decided to book this hotel. And since we didn't want to go back too late on the 4th day to Lexington, Kentucky, we wanted to find another halfway point. So we decided to stop in Cleveland, Ohio since it was a halfway point, and I'm really familiar with the area since I grew up here. So I knew where all the good food was at. I didn't have to think too much when stopping here. Specifically, I wanted to stop at this hotel I've always seen. It was built up in this new place called Pinecrest. I remember it was the first location where there was a Shake Shack, and it was a pretty nice area. At the time we booked it, it was $250, but it was only 10,000 points. So I thought it was worth it, and I booked that hotel. Okay, the hotels were set. Next, I had to plan out the charging stops for the Tesla, because unlike a gas car, there are only so many charging stations. And the Tesla I rented was a short-range Model 3, which I know can go for a maximum of 260 miles. However, based on research and advice I've been given, you shouldn't be going exactly at that 260, because usually it's a lot lower than that. You're like riding on the edge if you go exactly 260. However, you shouldn't be charging all the time, because another advice I was given is if you don't let the battery run down to a really low point, it's harder and slower to charge. So I wanted to to make sure there was a charging stop at least every 220 miles or 240 miles. So I went on to Tesla, found the supercharging map, and filtered it to show me only the Tesla superchargers. Then I went on to Google Maps, typed in Lexington, Kentucky to Andor House, the hotel we'll be staying at on the first day. And I chose the Cleveland route even though it is a little bit longer and more time consuming. I'm more comfortable in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland since the first half of my life I grew up in Cleveland and the second half I stayed in Columbus for college. Plus this route will also pass by Niagara Falls. And then I try to find a supercharger every about 220 miles. So the charging routes I decided to go with was from Lexington to Columbus if Hertz gave me a fully charged Tesla. If it was only partially charged, then I would stop in Cincinnati because from Lexington to Cincinnati it was only 110 miles. And then after I charge up in Cincinnati, then go to Columbus. And then from Columbus to Macedonia or Cleveland, Ohio, which was 120 miles away from Columbus. After that, Erie, Pennsylvania, which was about another 100 miles. And then from Erie, Pennsylvania to Niagara Falls Supercharger, which was about 220 miles. And then finally charging at Niagara Falls to Toronto. And that will end it for the first day. For the second day, when I go to the second hotel in Burlington, Ontario, Canada, there was a supercharger there. So if I had enough charge to go from Toronto to Burlington, I wouldn't have to charge in Toronto. I would only have to charge from Burlington, especially since it was so close to Toronto. It was only about 50 miles. Now when I was leaving Canada, I did exactly the same thing, except we're starting from Burlington, Ontario, Canada, and going back to Kentucky. So I was thinking I could charge 100% in Burlington, then go back to Erie, Pennsylvania, which was only 160 miles. My wife was thinking maybe she wanted to stop at Buffalo because there was an outlet that she wanted to go to, but as you saw from the video, we ended up not stopping there. But there are charging stations in Buffalo, New York. Then after Erie would be Macedonia, Ohio, or back to Cleveland. Then from Macedonia to Cincinnati, Ohio, which was 240 miles. And then that should be enough to make it back to Lexington, Kentucky. And if we had time, we would stop at Hamburg, Kentucky, which is the only Tesla supercharging station in Lexington, because we had to return to Tesla at least at 80%, according to the Hertz representative. So the plan going to Canada was pretty set because I already knew a lot of things that I could stop at, because like I said, I was very familiar with the area. I knew where I wanted to stop at. So the plan on April 7th, which was a Friday, was to wake up at 6 a.m., call an Uber at 7:30 a.m., and get to Hertz at 8 a.m. when they open, and when I made the reservation so we can get on the road as quickly as possible. Then from there, drive up to Columbus, stop at Bell's Bakery because we thought it would be a good road trip snack, and then not stop at Bell's Bakery for too long so we can charge in Polaris, thereby doing two things at once, charging and eating lunch at the same time, so we didn't have to waste time. And then by the time we were done charging, I only budgeted about 30 minutes to charge the car. Based on what I read online, that seems pretty reasonable. So leaving at 1 p.m., making it to Twinsburg, Ohio, which basically is Macedonia or Cleveland, Ohio, at 3 p.m., leave at 4 p.m., and then make it to Erie, Pennsylvania at 6 p.m. And since I'm planning to pick up a bunch of food at Bell's Bakery, we didn't have to stop again for dinner. And then after we were done in Erie, Pennsylvania, I budgeted in about 30 minutes. We would make it to Buffalo about 8:30 p.m., basically the Canadian border. Budgeted the time we would be at the border, plus if we needed to charge one more time at Niagara Falls. And leaving going towards Toronto at 9 p.m. and arrive at the hotel at 11 p.m. So I try to budget in a lot of time in between while being realistic. That's a key thing when making an itinerary. You have to be realistic. You have to know the type of people you're traveling with to make a really good itinerary. Like for example, are you traveling with someone that needs to stop a lot to go to the rest areas? If that's the case, I would budget in more time. But you're traveling with someone, or maybe you're traveling by yourself and you're completely fine fasting for the whole day, then all you have to plan is the charging stops. You could just make it straight over there. So that's a key part of planning an itinerary. Be realistic. Next though came the harder part, what to do when you get there. So personally what I like to do is mark the places you have to go or want to go. So for example, where I have to go is the hotels. So I'm going to be marking down Andor House, the Pearl Hotel and Spa, and the AC Hotel in Cleveland. Next things I would mark is where I want to go. So for example, my wife was doing research in Canada. She wanted to go to Shelby Shawarma. She loves the YouTube shorts about them. She wanted to try a Starbucks because they had an interesting menu. And she also wanted to try a McDonald's because they had poutine fries. And that's something you can't get in America. So along the route, we tried to find where all the Shelby Shawarmas were at, Starbucks. We could plan them out and not backtrack. And then next, you would think you would want to plan what you're doing those days, right? I would actually advise against that, unless you know for sure you really want to go there. Because what I personally like to do is mark the foods that I want to go to. Because when you mark out all the foods that you want to go to, it will just naturally show you where you want to spend your time. And you'll see what I mean in a second. So for example, our favorite food is to find Afghanistan kebabs. That's some of my favorite food I've ever had. So I went around the city marking all the kebab shops that I thought looked good. And then next, my wife wants coffee every morning, so I marked down all the coffee shops near our hotel. And then another favorite food that we want to mark down is ramen. So we marked down a bunch of ramen shops that we thought were pretty good, at least looked good. Maybe find some sushi places, find some other Asian foods like pool noodles, that stuff is pretty good. Maybe find some breakfast places if we wanted it. Mark down some Japanese cosmetic stores. My wife is obsessed with skincare from Japan and Korea. Apparently it's the best. Mark down some Asian bakeries, mark down some bubble tea shops, mark down some pho shops, mark down some Korean places. Also mark down some Italian bakeries, those are pretty good. Some gelato places, those are also pretty good. And now you have a pretty decent map of the things that you want to eat at. The second step is mark some of the stores that you want to go to. You know, like the Japanese cosmetic stores. One major thing that my wife wanted to find was a Uniqlo, which is basically like a Japanese Forever 21. She also wanted to find a bunch of bookstores, used or new books, so mark some of those down. And by now you're starting to see a pattern of the places that you want to go to. Now for the entertainment or stuff you want to do, I would just look in those clustered areas because those areas are probably where you're going to be wanting to hang out at anyways. Like for example, we marked down a bunch of places in this little area, and when you scroll in, you realize that it's a Chinatown in Toronto. And then you'll see some other places like an Art Gallery of Ontario, some parks over here. You scroll into this little cluster, you'll see there's another park square type center. You see what's marked as the CN Tower, Ontario Old City Hall. There's the IKEA down in this little cluster. Apparently where the Uniqlo was at is inside a downtown mall, so that's pretty cool. Gotta check that out. So that's the method I like to plan using my trips. Oh, also when we were zooming in, we saw this place called Kim's Convenience, and we're like, Kim's Convenience? I know that's a show on Netflix, but is it based on real life events? Like what? So we clicked on it, and apparently the Netflix show is based on a real place, so that's pretty cool. If we had time, we definitely had to check it out. Usually I'm pretty happy with this method because the places that you want to eat at are usually the places that you want to hang out at. It just goes 2 and 2 together. And then just do that for the other cities that you plan to stop at. And then lastly for this road trip, you want to figure out what was around the Tesla superchargers. Like for example, there were 2 Tesla superchargers in Erie, Pennsylvania. One was near a Cracker Barrel, Hilton Garden Inn, so there was some stuff to do there and it looked pretty safe to stop at. The other one though was next to a Sheetz gas station, so out of the 2, I do trust the Hilton to be a better area to stop at. So definitely if you're going to be renting out a Tesla, make sure to do your research on what's around that Tesla supercharger. They're not all situated in the best areas. And now we got our little dot map. Now it comes down to what you need to do and what you really want to do, and what is realistically possible within your time. So if for example, back to my itinerary, on April 8th, the next day, which was a Saturday, you also got to keep the days in check and make sure the place that you want to go is actually open. So I realistically knew that if we're going to arrive to the hotel at 11 p.m, so I probably knew we were going to be checking out late the next day. And by the time we got situated and put all our belongings away, it would be about 12 o'clock. So we could either have a late coffee break, lunch, or brunch. And this option I left open because there were a lot of places that I marked on the map that I think we would be satisfied with, and then just choose based on when we get there. But after lunch, we were thinking about walking down to the mall because we really wanted or needed to go to Uniqlo since we didn't have access to a Uniqlo over here. And we thought we would maybe spend about an hour at the mall because that's usually about the amount of time that we usually spend at a mall. Not too long. We usually don't buy too many things. And then by 4 p.m, we wanted to try to go to a Starbucks Reserve. And then at 5, we wanted to go to Pacific Mall, which I basically grew up there with the amount of times that my mom took me there every time we visited Canada. And then be at the second hotel, the Pearl Hotel, at 7 p.m. However, if you see my Canada vlog, it didn't pan out this way, which is completely okay. Plans are only so much. They're not set in stone, and you gotta keep that in mind. I've always heard that people who plan out their trips and make sure you get to that place exactly on time, that's not a vacation, that's work. You gotta be flexible. That's why I like to pin the places that I think I want to go to. So if something doesn't work out, maybe that place is closed, maybe we don't want to go there anymore, I have other options to do something else. However, that wasn't the reason why we went off track off the itinerary. My wife just wasn't feeling well after the mall and just wanted to head to the second hotel, which, you know, was completely fine by me. And then the next day, April 9th or Easter Sunday, we wanted to try to wake up around 9 a.m, find coffee by 10 a.m, go to Shelby Shawarma's at noon, be at Niagara Falls at 1 p.m, leave Niagara Falls at 2 p.m, be in Buffalo to charge the Tesla at 3 p.m, leave Buffalo maybe at 4, and then be in Cleveland or Macedonia by 7 p.m, leave Macedonia and then go to Columbus by 10 p.m, and then finally be in Lexington, Kentucky back home at 1 a.m. And this was actually my first plan. However, we saw it was a little bit ridiculous arriving back home at 1 a.m. and to extend the rental was only $40. So we decided to split it up, keep the same plan but stop in Cleveland, Ohio. So therefore we would have more time at Niagara Falls. Maybe we wake up late. We wouldn't have to rush back and drive too late back to Lexington, Kentucky. So we just separated that day into 2 days and then leave from Cleveland, go to Columbus to charge, and then make it back to Lexington, Kentucky. We wouldn't have to rush, which ended up being the AC Hotel in Beechwood, Ohio. And then the day after that, we would take the Tesla to charge in Hamburg and return it to Hertz at 12 p.m. And this is a structure I usually stick with when planning my itinerary. And so far I've been pretty happy with it, and other people have been happy with it. It's structured enough we're not dilly-dallying and for sure not backtracking, because that's one thing I really hate about some people who don't plan. They'll go to the other side of town and then come back to the other side of town and then just be bouncing back and forth. You're going to be wasting a lot of time just traveling. So that's why, in my opinion, you always got to have an itinerary when you're traveling. It doesn't have to be too strict though. Make sure you had the flexibility is my philosophy on it. Okay, now then, cool. We have everything planned out for the trip. Now, what did I take to Canada? And the only legal requirement I had to take to Canada was our passports. Everything else was optional. We did take our global entry card so we can get back into the United States faster. We bought a bunch of water bottles to take on this road trip. For my stuff, I packed it all in the Way Daily carry-on because it was only going to be like a weekend trip. So what I packed was 3 outfits, 3 pajamas, and it all fit on the one side of the Way Daily carry-on. And on the other side, I just packed toiletries, like band-aids, toothbrush, toothpaste, mouthwash. And we had 3 toiletry bags, and everything fit with room to spare. But my wife, on the other hand, she definitely did not pack only 3 outfits. If she did, we could probably fit everything in the Way Daily carry-on with maybe a tote bag or something like that. I don't remember how many outfits she brought, but I think it was like 5 or 7, so definitely a lot. I even had to fill out the other side too. It was packed stuffed. And the last bag we took that wasn't the water bottle bag was my favorite camera bag from Peak Design. They make the best bags, period. And I just loaded up some power banks, my charger, my tripod, the camera to get really good footage, some charging cords, microphone, and we also put our passports in this bag since it was easier to get into compared to opening our luggages. But yeah, that's basically how I plan my trips anywhere I go and what's in my suitcase. Now I know what you're itching to learn. What was it like driving a Tesla for the first time, especially the rental experience from Hertz? Driving 1,400 miles, especially driving the rental Tesla car across the Canadian border? Well, you're in luck because in the next video in this series, I'll be talking exactly about that. So get ready for that video and I'll see you later.